Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through the most important articles from today's newspaper. We are going to discuss newspaper dated 5th of May 2020, and the article we'll be taking up for today's discussion has been tabulated before you on the screen. The time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. By now, you must already be aware of the rich resource of study material that we have on ELEARN platform. I just want to bring to your attention one particular resource. When you go to this Prelims Test Series tab on our ELEARN platform and then you click on the Test Series sub-tab, you will be brought to this page. Here you can see there's a link of DNS quiz. These quizzes are the compilation of the DNS questions of approximately a year, and they have been segregated topic-wise and they can be taken in format of a test. They are free of cost, and for revision of current affair, you should attempt these quizzes. There is a news on page number 7, COVID-19 and India's fiscal conundrum. Conundrum basically is difficult and confusing problem. We do not know what exactly will be the solution and we only come up with conjecture. Conjecture is unverified suggestion or claim. COVID-19 pandemic has taken a toll on global economy. So much so that many countries now are getting jittery and they don't want to wait until the virus subsides. They rather have started their normal economic activity. Because more we wait, it will become even more difficult to come out of economic slowdown. In fact, already the economic slowdown has happened so much so that huge amount of money is required for economy to come on track. And discussion has taken up the steam as to where the money is going to come from. Until recently, India was forecasted as one of the fastest growing economy. But IMF has slashed down the projected growth of India in 2020 to 1.9%. World Bank also has estimated the growth in the current and in the next year to be between 1.5 to 2.8%. These growth figures are the lowest since 1991. So something extraordinary needs to be done to put the economy back on track. And Government of India has come up with a stimulus package of rupees 1.7 trillion or 1.7 lakh crore. This is around 1% of country's GDP. Economists are suggesting that this is too low. Compared to other nations like Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and even compared to India's own stimulus package back in 2008 to deal with the financial meltdown, then the stimulus package was around 4.3% of GDP. Although it is expected that Government of India will come up with another stimulus package, but so far the announcement has been worth of 1% of India's GDP. This 1% is too less compared to the stimulus package given out by other countries. For instance, Japan has given a package of 20% of its GDP, Malaysia around 16%, Singapore around 12%. Question to be asked is, why India is playing safe? Why India is not coming up with a larger stimulus package? Although it is understandable that Government of India will come up in a phased manner with more stimulus, but that is not going to be close enough to what is required. Presently the first one is 1%, maybe with the second and third one it will reach to 2 to 3%. But still that will be too low compared to what is demanded and suggested by the economists. The economists are estimating that 5 to 10% of GDP will be required to put the economy back on track. One reason why India's stimulus package is low, you would understand if you look at other data. If you look at the fiscal deficit data of India, the budget targeted 3.5%, the last one that was presented. But the data which has come in late February has already revealed that this 3.5% target has already been breached by 128%. That means that the fiscal deficit currently is around already 4.5%. So before the stimulus package was announced, India's fiscal deficit stood at 4.5%. For other countries like Japan was 3.1%, Malaysia 3.2%, and the last budget in Singapore targeted fiscal deficit of only 0.7%. This is just one reason. If you look at the bond market of these countries, they are pretty strong. So government of these countries can release bond to finance their debt. That is not true for India because the sovereign rating already is low. These countries also have impressive sovereign wealth fund, and financing can be done from there as well. But India does not have that luxury. So, because of sound economic and financial footing these countries were on, they can afford to come up with a higher fiscal stimulus. And it is estimated after implementation of these stimulus, the fiscal deficit of these countries are going to go as high as 8 to 10%. And fiscal deficit of India then will be lower compared to these countries. So, actually, it is the financial health of our nation that will force the capping of the fiscal stimulus. We cannot cross it because if we come up with a high fiscal stimulus, then the debt on government will be very high. Higher debt on government will reduce the sovereign rating. And since the bond market is already not developed, further the investor will be chased away because of reduced sovereign rating. And there will be no way to finance this debt. And that is why it is conundrum. You do not know what to do. If you try high fiscal stimulus and high debt of the government, then you may be trapped and your fiscal deficit will ever remain high. That will be even more detrimental for economy. So while trying to fix the economy, you will deteriorate it even more. And that is what conundrum, the confusing problem in the hand. Also, I like to highlight that it has been highlighted by economic survey and many economists time and again that spending is important. Whenever there's a time of slowdown, you just don't have to give tax holidays and incentive like that, but proactive spending by government is important. It's a greater multiplier than other step like tax holidays. So stimulus is important, but how to stimulate it and how to finance the stimuli, that is really tricky. RBI has done its part. RBI has carried out open market operations and has tried its best to pump in liquidity. RBI has also come up with regulatory forbearance in which paying off loan will be deferred and that account will not be treated as NPA. RBI also has cut the policy rate substantially. But in situation like this, monetary policy has its limitation. Because there has been disruption of supply chain on such a large scale, there has to be a focused fiscal policy. So let's discuss as to what can be done to mobilize resources. Let's explore the options. One option in hand of government, any government, is to issue bond. But the problem is, although the bond market of India is huge, it is around 48 lakh crore, but it is not stable. And in a situation like this, any investor will prefer a more stable, sound bond market in Europe or in United States. And since this is a global problem, India will not have this advantage of money coming in from Europe and US into Asia and particularly to India. There is a suggestion that we also discussed in the previous DNS that India can issue GDP linked bonds, and this has been done by some European countries when they were having severe financial crisis. But the problem again is that since this is a global problem, it will be very difficult to find the investor because every country is facing this problem. So it's not that investor in Europe and United States are flush with cash, so they will not come to India or developing markets citing some opportunity. So although it's a good idea, GDP linked bonds, but it's not going to work so much. Because sovereign rating of India is low. International investors are becoming risk averse and the domestic bond market of India is not very well developed. So in absence of international investor, India can also not look for a domestic bond market. That is also not a viable option. We have already seen foreign portfolio investors getting out of the country and resulting in weakening of rupee. So raising money through bonds, although this will be the prime way in which government will try to finance its debt, but this will not be sufficient to the scale of money that is required presently. Then some countries, mostly the lower income group country, they are turning to IMF and they are seeking help. But this option is neither viable nor India should seek this option because IMF will help those countries which are at the verge of collapse. One way in which poor economy is managing by asking some rich nations to forego the interest payment. For instance, recently G7 countries have suspended the debt service payments for lower income group nations. But this is not an option for India. What else other countries are doing? Other countries are taking the help of their cash flushed sovereign wealth funds. Countries like Malaysia, Singapore, even China, UAE, they have huge money in sovereign wealth fund. Unfortunately, India does not have one. The first sovereign wealth fund of India is NIIF, National Infrastructure Investment Fund. And in true sense, this is not sovereign because 49% of share is of Government of India, rest is of private sector. And there is not huge sum of money in it. It started with some 40,000 crore. Although there has been announcement recently by Canada and other countries that they will pour in money, but now after the economic slowdown, it is highly doubted whether they will fulfill the promise or not. But considering there is 40,000 crore, first of all, the money is not entirely of government. And second of all, the amount is too small. Announcement has been of 1.7 lakh crore. With the likely announcement of second and third stimulus package, it will increase to anywhere between 3 to 4 lakh crore. So looking at India's Sovereign Wealth Fund or NIIF will not yield much. What else can be done? Credit from international institution can be sought. And in fact, Asian Development Bank and World Bank has already committed 1.5 billion and $1 billion respectively. $1 billion would be 75 billion rupees. 75 billion rupees is just a drop in the bucket compared to what we are looking at. We are looking at 1.7 trillion, 1.7 lakh crore, that is 1.7 trillion rupees. So what money we are going to get from international institutions will only be peanut because they have to finance countries globally, so it will not be wise to expect substantial money coming only to India. Then what else? What else can be done is disinvestment. India had the target of 65,000 crore by disinvestment, but it is unlikely that it will be even remotely met. The reason is it is very difficult to sell PSUs when the economy is slowed down. For instance, you cannot sell Air India because the entire global airline industry has taken a hit. Even if you want to sell shares of BPCL, you won't be able to do because oil prices have crashed. So it will not be wise again to think that substantial money is going to come from here. Then what else? Then most of you must be thinking by now that let's hit on the foreign exchange reserves. Foreign exchange reserve of India has grown substantially in last few years. Presently it is $476 billion. This will be approximately, considering the variation in exchange rate, 35 lakh crore. This is too much of money. 5 to 10 lakh crore will be sufficient to finance the stimuli package. But as tempting as it may seem, it is never advisable, never, to touch on the foreign exchange reserves. We had a very bitter experience in 1991. And the macroeconomic parameters are not in a very healthy state as we have already discussed. The government debt to GDP ratio is around 70%. If you see the central government and the state government fiscal deficit combined, that is around 7.5%. Current account deficit, although has decreased substantially, but it has not vanished. It is around 0.2%, but it can increase anytime. Because presently the pressure on balance of payment is going to increase because of increased import of medical related devices. Then there will be further cost of import of vaccine eventually. Indian economy is also dependent on short-term capital inflows through FII. So although it is a very tempting idea, foreign exchange reserve is the last defense of a nation against bankruptcy. So no economist advise actually to touch on this foreign exchange reserve. Although if situation becomes too dire, some amount of money can be taken from it. But let's consider that we are not touching on this. If we are not touching on this, then what option we are left with? There is one option, and again that is very dangerous option. The option is to monetize the deficit, meaning ask RBI to print money and government can just take it from RBI and fund all its debt. So government can take the money from the security market, from the bond market, and later just pay it back through the printed money. But you must be very well aware that when you put extra money in the economy, the liquidity will increase and hence the inflation will increase. But A, inflation has been in control in recent time. And B, most importantly, there is going to be a demand collapse in the recent time to come. Because of the lockdown, as people don't have money. So there is not going to be any inflationary pressure in the economy. So in this case, money actually can be printed in a very controlled manner. But again, this is also considered as the last resort to finance your debt. And RBI has stopped doing it since 1997. But just to give you an information, FRBM Act allows this under national calamity. So legally it can be done, there is no problem. But RBI has to be very, very cautious that throughout the time it is being done, inflation remains under control. So now you must have understood the title of the news, that it is really a conundrum. You can try various ways, but every way will have its fallback. So finally, we'll have to discuss actually then what exactly should Government of India be doing right now. First of all, there is already some money in the hands of government. Take it out and put it to work. For instance, there is 60,000 crore already in the State Disaster Response Fund. And we have seen this many a times earlier as well. Then we have seen also earlier in previous DNS that there are around 15 PSUs who have bank deposit of 65,000 crore. Now this is well above their operational requirement. This is just the saving of the PSUs for further investment. Now in the global slowdown, it is less likely that any investment and expansion of operation is going to happen. This money can be used in a better way for the revival of economy. So let's say around 50 to 55 or even 60,000 crore government can take from these PSUs. So that will add up to 1.2 lakh crore already. Then there are options of monetizing the non-core assets of PSUs. This process can be accelerated, and if some 10,000 crore can come from there, the number will come to 1.3. 1.3 lakh crore is not bad of an amount, and another fiscal stimulus can be announced just by using this money. Then there is a silver lining in the cloudy financial global environment, and that is the windfall gain that Government of India is going to get on account of crash in global oil and gas prices. And it is estimated that the gain that India is going to have is around 1 to 1.5% of GDP. Present financial stimulus announced is around 1% of GDP. So another one can be done through this gain that India is going to have. So this money is already there or is going to come. What else has to be done is to say goodbye to fiscal deficit targeting under Financial Responsibility and Budget Management Act. FRBM Act has mandated the maximum deficit to be 3.8%. We already have crossed it. The present estimated deficit is 4.5%, and in no ways the target of FRBM can be met. So it has to be temporarily suspended, and it was suspended during the financial crisis of 2008. Focus more has to be on governance, on planning, on implementation, because the sources of revenue are limited. We cannot put as much money as we want because we know all the penny has to be paid back. So whatever amount of money that we have talked about in the previous slide, that and the resources mobilized from the bond market, some of the money that we can get from the international institutions, and if need be, some money can be taken from the savings of RBI, and God forbid, if need be, we can take out some money from our forex reserve. But still everything will fail if governance is not efficient. So in this regard, it is suggested that we have to focus on high priority and high productive areas. And some of the projects like bullet trains and things like that have to be shelved for some time. Income support to the weak, vulnerable section through DBT has to be focused, and this government has already started. Income support to the farmer through the various schemes will be carried through. Income support to MSME sector EPFO has started. Those enterprises which have less than 100 employees with salaries less than rupees 15,000 are being given the salary of 3 months from the side of the government. This needs to be further extended for construction workers as well, and the data of construction worker is already with Labour Ministry. So focus must be on planning and implementation of income support. And economists like Abhijit Banerjee, they have been focusing more and more on the idea that money should come in the hands of people. It is also suggested by many that there has to be focus on hygiene, sanitation, clean water must be supplied because we cannot afford another pandemic when we are dealing already with one. In summer, in Delhi, there's problem of dengue. Now we can't afford to have dengue when already we are dealing with coronavirus. The chairman of FCI recently announced that there are more than sufficient grains in the godowns of FCI. But in today's newspaper, you would read that there's an article, Supreme Court has accepted to hear a PIL filed by Mr. Jairam Ramesh on the issue of acute food shortage. That should not be happening. There must be effective distribution of the food grains that we have with FCI so that this dichotomy of food excess with FCI and acute food security do not exist. So focus has to be on the area of governance. More effort should be put in for tax simplification, especially for MSMEs and exporters. And some economists are also suggesting that GST tax rate should be cut down by 50% for all the categories. To stimulate investment from the private sector in the bond market, to participate in open market operations, and so hence and so forth, some suggestions are to suspend or at least reduce substantially the capital gains tax. And if the government comes up with a health related bond, then that should be made tax free to incentivize more investment. And finally, there is a very important issue that should be touched upon in the area of governance. It has been suggested that spending by the state has greater positive effect than spending by the center in stimulating the economy. Because the state is closer to the people, and when the pipeline of investment gets smaller, it becomes more effective on account of less leakage. So, whatever money of the state is spending with the center on account of GST compensation or state disaster response fund, everything should be cleared immediately. And apart from that, the state government should be enabled to raise funds from international institutions and other ways. State government constitutionally need to take permission, and those permissions should be promptly given by the center to the state government to raise more revenues on time. So we understand that there are limitations in resource mobilization. We should do the best that we can, but the chariot that will take us out of the economic slowdown will also have a wheel of governance, and the wheel of governance should be also focused on for speedy and smooth exit from the present financial crisis. This is lead article from page number 6. MPLADS, its suspension and why it must go. In this article, the author has been batting for abolition of MPLADS. This scheme and the constitutional debate revolving around this scheme is very important for the mains exam. It is pertinent to two topics mentioned in the syllabus of GS paper 2, separation of power between various organs. This is something we will discuss, and it is also important under the heading Government Policies and Interventions for Development in Various Sectors and Issues Arising Out of Their Design and Implementation. Recently, the Cabinet has approved to suspend the MPLAD scheme, Members of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme, for 2 years. The reasoning obviously is to help the government financially to better deal with the impact of COVID-19. Before we delve into the reasons put forward by the author for the abolition of the scheme, let's look at the basic of the scheme that will be important for the prelims exam. First of all, it's a central sector scheme, meaning all the money is going to come from the center. The scheme began in 1993 and initially it was under Ministry of Rural Development. But later the scheme came under the charge of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This is important, you have to remember this. The objective of the scheme is to enable the MPs to recommend work. It is important for you to note here itself, the role of MP is limited to recommending projects. This phrasing is very important and we'll pick this up in a while. The stated purpose of the scheme is to create durable community assets. So the nature of the scheme is public welfare. This is also an important thing to note and we'll pick it up again in our analysis in few minutes. MPs receive rupees 5 crore a year, that would add up to 25 crore in his tenure. The money come in two installments, rupees 2.5 crore each every year. The fund under the scheme are non-lapsable, meaning even if the money remains unutilized in a financial year, that will not go back to the ministry. Rather, it will keep accumulating up and the money can be used in the coming financial years. And this is one of the major reasons why funds under MPLAD scheme remains unutilized. Lok Sabha MPs can recommend work anywhere in his constituency. Rajya Sabha MP can recommend the work anywhere in the state he has been elected from, and nominated members of the parliament can recommend work anywhere in the country. Let me tell you one more important thing, which we already have slightly discussed. The role of the MP is to recommend the place and nature of the work he wants to take up. The fund is released from the office of district collector, and the implementation of the project is done by local administration. This is important to note because later on, when we will be discussing separation of power and violation of the principle of federalism, it will be argued that implementation actually is done by local administration. So as such, there is no violation of principle of federalism. For the prelims exam, you also have to be aware that the funds under the MPLAD scheme can be used to donate to a trust or a public fund. and the capping for such donation is rupees 1 crore. The fund under MPLADS scheme can also be used in implementing other schemes such as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, Accessible India Campaign, conservation of water through rainforest harvesting, and Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana. In 2016, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation came up with a notification, and that notification allowed for the divergence of fund from MPLAD scheme to these schemes. In the article, the author is batting left, right, and center for the abolition of the scheme, and the most important reason that he puts forward for this is that the scheme violates the principle of separation of power. You understand the principle of separation of power, the laws are made by the legislature and it's implemented by the executive. But in this case, the member of parliaments who are part of legislature, they themselves are implementing a scheme, meaning they are acting as executive. So for this reason, this is violating the principle of separation of power. And if we can just extend this argument, we can also say that this is also in breach of federalism. It is violating the principle of federalism because in a federal setup, the union government can incur expenditure only with respect to matters over which it has jurisdiction, as mentioned in Indian case in the 7th schedule. But in case of MPLAD, the member of parliament who are part of the central government, they can recommend project of any nature. They can also be in the state list as mentioned in the 7th schedule. So that will be violative of the separation of power and the spirit of federalism. Further, the MPLAD encroaches upon the domain of local self-government because planning and execution of local project that is supposed to be done by the local bodies under the provision of Part 9 and Part 9A of the Constitution. To extend it little more, you can also say that this scheme has no statutory backing. In case of Manrega and other important flagship programs of Government of India, there is a legislation. But in case of MPLAD, there is no legislation, and we have just talked about that Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation come up with notifications from time to time, and that decides the scope of the scheme. I must also tell you that in 2002, National Commission to Review the Working of Constitution recommended immediate discontinuation of MPLAD scheme on the ground that it was inconsistent with the spirit of federalism and distribution of power between the center and the state. Also, the second Administrative Reform Commission report in 2007 had similar recommendation. These arguments make a strong case that the MPLAD scheme goes against the spirit and the provisions of the Constitution. But however, the final say on constitutional matter is of Supreme Court. And after many petitions being filed from 2006, finally in 2010, Supreme Court made a judgment on the scheme, and the Article 2 has noted this, that Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of the scheme. But then the court also has to make certain argument as to why it thinks that it does not violate the provisions of the Constitution as has been argued here. But before we get into it, I'll just give you other reasons that the article has put forward as to why the scheme should go. Have similar limitations. For example, it says that there is underutilization of fund, and it gives data that in the last Lok Sabha, in the first year, only 16% of the fund under the scheme was utilized. Because it is non-lapsable, so MPs are not in any hurry to utilize the fund in the initial years of their tenure. The article also put forward another data that till 2015, 5,000 crore of the fund under the scheme remain underutilized. Then the article highlights the CAG report, which reprimand the implementation of the scheme. And the stated objective of the scheme of asset creation has been undermined because according to the CAG report, 78% of the fund are used for maintenance and improvement of the existing asset rather than creation of new asset. Further, there is no accountability for the expenditure. If the executive does the implementation, the legislature, the various parliamentary bodies can scrutinize it and can come up with a report. But in this case, the legislature itself is implementing it. So there is question of accountability, and there is none in this case. Then the omnipresent problem of nexus between the MP and the private firm, the contractors. Most of the time the contractor is the known one, is the confidant of the MP, or is the one who is opinion maker or opinion influencer who comes very handy and become helpful for the MP during the time of election. Now let's come to the part that is important and will interest you more. In 2010, as we have talked about, the 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court upheld the constitutional validity of MPLADS scheme, and the argument put forward by the court was this. First, Indian constitution does not recognize strict power of separation. So the first argument that the author has made, and the most prominent one, that the scheme violates the separation of power, fails to be a starter. The court said even though MPs have been given seemingly executive function, their role is limited to recommending the works. And that's why we noted this phrase of recommendatory in nature in the beginning. MP's role is limited to recommending work, and actual implementation is done by local authorities. So neither does it violate the principle of separation of power, nor does it violate or breach the concept of federalism. The court further stated that India has quasi-federal nature of constitution. Court cited Article 282. Article 282 gives power to both union and the state government to give grants for any purpose, irrespective whether that purpose is falling within their jurisdiction of Schedule 7 or not, as far as the purpose is public purpose. And clearly, the purpose of this scheme is public purpose because the stated objective is asset creation. So neither does it violate the principle of separation of power, nor does it violate the concept of federalism. On this ground, the court upheld the constitutional validity of MPLAD scheme. So the constitutional validity is settled. Once Supreme Court said so, it is settled. There is no more question on this. It do not violate separation of power. It does not violate the concept of federalism. Done. Now the question remains, can it still be continued, or still there is ground for abandoning the scheme? If you look at the implementation part, it is poor, it is pathetic. But it is highly less likely that the scheme will be abandoned, because it suits the interest of the legislatures. So if the scheme is not going to go, at least we can have some safeguard measures in place to reduce the corruption and make it more effective. Now you do some brainstorming and suggest to me as to what measures can be put in place to ensure that the MPLAD scheme becomes more efficient and serves the public purpose better. Now let's do this editorial article from page number 6. It has been titled Off Course, meaning the interstate river water dispute mechanism going off the normal course that it should have been ideally going. This article is related to Kaveri water dispute. Interstate river water dispute is a very important topic to be covered under GS paper 2 in the mains exam. This article has come up because recently notification from central government has declared that Kaveri Water Management Authority will come under the administrative control of Ministry of Jal Shakti. This has raised eyebrows among the opposition parties in the state and some farmers association. There are two things here. First of all, previous to Ministry of Jal Shakti, when Ministry of Water Resource and Ganga Rejuvenation existed, there was no notification like this. And second of all, the nature of Kaveri Water Management Authority is such that it works as an autonomous organization. There is no say of central government in the ruling of Central Water Management Authority, apart from, of course, the appointment of the members and the chairman. But once the body is to be constituted, it is to work as an independent regulatory authority. So bringing it under the administrative control of the ministry has not gone well with many quarters. But the editorial clarifies that first, it is only the administrative control, and water management authority for other disputed rivers have already been declared to be under administrative control of the ministry. So as such, this notification is not any violation. Let us take this opportunity to quickly revise Kaveri water dispute. First of all, it is a dispute of Kaveri river among 4 states and UTs: Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala and Puducherry. The dispute is pretty old, and in 1990, to resolve the dispute, Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal was set by Government of India. This body was formed under the provision of Interstate River Water Dispute Act 1956. And Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal gave the final verdict in 2007. At this point, it's important for me to bring your attention to Article 262. Article 262 says that Parliament may by law provide for the adjugation of any dispute or complaint with respect to the use, distribution, or control of the waters of or in any interstate river or river valley. Now, since that body has to be formed as the provision of a law, so the law in this case is Interstate River Water Dispute Act 1956. So, under the provision of Article 262 and this law, this body was constituted, Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal. It gave the verdict in 2007, but the parties were not happy and it went to the Supreme Court. However, it is also important for you to note that Article 262 also says that Parliament may, by law, provide that neither the Supreme Court or any other court shall exercise jurisdiction in respect to any dispute or complaint as mentioned above, meaning the courts will not have jurisdiction in interstate river water dispute if Parliament by law provides so. But however, by now during your course of preparation, you must have been aware that judiciary in India is very, very innovative. And by the virtue of your preparation, you would be aware by now that a citizen or any aggrieved party can approach High Court or Supreme Court directly if there is violation of fundamental right under the provision of Article 32. And Supreme Court linked the issue with one of the fundamental right as mentioned in Article 21, right to life. So now the issue can come to Supreme Court and it cannot be stopped by any law. So Supreme Court allowed the case to come to it through special leave petition mentioned in Article 136. And the case went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court gave its final verdict in February 2018. It modified the judgment given by Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal and directed the central government to draft a scheme under Section 6A of Interstate Water Dispute Act. Section 6A of the Act basically authorizes the central government to make a scheme to implement the decision of the tribunal. So following the direction of the Honorable Supreme Court, central government submitted a draft Kaveri Water Management Scheme under which two bodies were formulated, Kaveri Water Management Authority and Kaveri Water Regulation Committee. Kaveri Water Regulation Committee basically is the executive arm of Kaveri Water Management Authority. It is a body that works on ground. It is a body that will take day-to-day data on water levels and the storage and the usage and the release and so on. And using that data, Central Water Management Authority will ensure that the judgment of the tribunal as modified by the Supreme Court is being implemented. So now let's talk about this very important body, Kaveri Water Management Authority, because this is very, very important for the prelims examination. Kaveri Water Management Authority is going to be the sole body to implement Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal Award as modified by the Supreme Court. The central government will have no say in implementing the scheme except for issuing administrative advisories. Kaveri Water Management Authority will comprise a chairman, a secretary, and 8 members. 2 members will be permanent, 2 members will be part-time by the central government, and 4 members will be representative of the 4 states and union territories party to this dispute. There is no full-time chairman appointed yet, and the chairman of the Central Water Commission is the acting chairman of Kaveri Water Management Authority. And the main mandate of Kaveri Water Management Authority, of course, is to ensure that the judgment of Supreme Court modifying the award of the tribunal is implemented. And for this purpose, the major thing that this authority has to ensure is in relation to storage, usage, regulation, and control of Kaveri waters. And in this sense, this authority becomes very, very powerful. Supreme Court in its award has distributed the Kaveri water usage, but that is not distributed on the dam basis or every storage facility basis. So the regulation of storage, usage and discharge etc. by every dam and storage facility that has to be done by this authority. Additionally, Kaveri Water Management Authority can also advise the state to take suitable measures to improve water usage efficiency. Authority's decision shall be final and binding with respect to storage, usage, regulation and control of Kaveri water for every storage facility. For example, in a dam, suppose the authority says that the water level has to be decreased so that the judgment of Supreme Court can be implemented. Now, in this case, the decision of the authority will be final. If the authority wants the level to be decreased, it has to be decreased. And if the state government are not listening to it, then the authority can take the help of the central government to implement its decision. And it has been decided that the total residual storage in any specified reservoir will be decided on June 1st every year. Also, in case of deficiency in water availability, the authority will consider reduction of water in different dams and storage facilities. And here also the decision of the authority will be final, and the decision will be taken by voting. And the state's proposal to create new storage facility will also be cleared by Kaveri Water Management Authority. So this is pretty powerful body. Kaveri Water Regulation Committee, as we have discussed, will work on ground. It will monitor the daily water levels, inflows and storage positions at major reservoirs storing the Kaveri water. The problem with Kaveri Water Management Authority, however, is that it does not yet have full-term chairman, despite the body being constituted now for 2 years. The authority is not fully functional and the southwest monsoon is about to set. So the notification to bring Kaveri Water Management Authority under the administrative control of the ministry, maybe formalization of this body will happen and it will become fully functional authority, because that is crucial for successful implementation of Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal Award as modified by Supreme Court. Now let us summarize our discussion for the purpose of prelims examination. In the beginning we saw that the fiscal deficit of center and state combined is around 7.5%, and for the center the present fiscal deficit running is 4.5%. The combined debt of center and the state is around 70% of India's GDP. But this is not very high. If you see the debt of Japan, that is 230% of GDP. It is one of the highest in the world. For Singapore also the data is quite high, 110%. And that is why you must have heard the finance minister saying that there is still scope of resource mobilization through debt instruments like bonds. Fiscal deficit target previously was 3.3%. But using the escape clause under the FRBM Act, which allows the increment of targeting by 0.5%, the fiscal deficit target was set as 3.8%. This is the maximum fiscal deficit target that can be set by law. But in all likelihood, this is going to be breached and fiscal deficit targeting has to be given holiday for some years, as was done during 2008 financial meltdown. MPLADS scheme, I suppose, is important for prelims exam. First thing you have to note is it comes under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. The target is to create durable community assets. 5 crore per year in hand of one MP, and it is non-lapsable. MP from Lok Sabha can choose any place in his constituency, MP from Raj Sabha anywhere in the state he has been elected from, and nominated members can choose any place in the entire country. MPLAD rules says that fund can also be used to be donated to a trust or public fund, but that donation has to be capped at rupees 1 crore. You also have to know that the fund from MPLAD can also be used in implementation of other schemes like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan, etc. etc. In this context, we also saw that in 2010, Supreme Court ruled the constitutional validity of MPLAD scheme. And there the court touched upon few important constitutional questions. The court observed that Indian constitution does not recognize strict separation of power. In fact, Article 50 talks about separation of power between executive and judiciary. And this principle explicitly has not been mentioned in the constitution, but implicit it is there. But nowhere the constitution has talked about separation of power among all the three organs of governance. Supreme Court in the judgment invoked Article 282 to bring home the point that India has a quasi-federal nature of the constitution. Article 282 says that both union and the state government has the power to make grants for any purpose, whether that lies in their jurisdiction in the scheme of distribution of power under Schedule 7 or not, as long as it serves public purpose. Then we talked about another very important article, Article 262. It says that Parliament may by law provide for adjudication of any dispute or complaint with respect to use, distribution or control of water related to any interstate river. And it also says that Parliament may by law provide that neither Supreme Court or any other court shall exercise jurisdiction in respect to any dispute concerning interstate water. But this did not stop the case regarding interstate water dispute going up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court accepts the case under Article 136, Special Leave Petition, because you can go to the Supreme Court if there is violation of fundamental right, and Supreme Court has linked the issue of water with Article 21, Right to Life. And for enforcement of fundamental right, you can go directly to the Supreme Court under the provision of Article 32. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion for today. Now we will take up question of the day. First, we will discuss yesterday's question, which was which of the following correctly describe the term herd immunity in context of infectious diseases? Immunity towards those diseases which have been already eradicated. This is quite absurd. Immunity towards that disease which occur every year. Indeed, herd immunity helps in fighting diseases that occur every year, but that is not the definition of herd immunity. Option C says resistance to the spread of a contagious disease as sufficiently high proportion of population has become immune to the disease. This in fact is the definition of herd immunity, and this is the right option. Option D is slight variant of option C, which says resistance to the spread of a contagious disease as sufficiently high proportion of population has been vaccinated. Vaccination is one way of accelerating the process of achievement of herd immunity. But herd immunity can be achieved with or without vaccine. So option D is not strictly correct. Answer would be option C. Coming to the question for today, consider the following statements. India has higher debt to GDP ratio compared to East and Southeast Asian nation. Monetizing the deficit is allowed by the FRBM Act under special circumstances, including the national calamity. Options are 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the session. I would recommend you to attempt the questions in the DNS quiz so that you really understand how much you have absorbed in last 40 minutes. Goodbye, take care, see you next time.